I do want to bring in Cliff Albright, rather. He's the co-founder of Black Voters Matter. He's with us from Atlanta. Cliff, good to have you back with us. Thank you for making the time.
Thanks for having me.
A couple of things to talk. I mean, last night we were here talking about what's going to happen in Georgia. Two very significant runoff elections that ended up going, both of them, to the Democrats. I do want to ask you about that. But first, I have to ask you about what I was just talking about, what has unfolded in Washington over this afternoon, what continues to happen outside of Capitol Hill. What does that say to you? What have you been thinking while you've seen that unfold?
You know, it's hard, and thanks for the question. There's so many layers to what I've been thinking and feeling, and even as I was sitting here listening to Frank and listening to him obviously struggle like with some of these issues. There's so many thoughts I had. The first is the obvious, right? And it's the thing that you see a lot of people on Twitter commenting on. It's the thing that you can't really miss. It's the noticing the difference in the treatment of these protests compared to other protests, compared to Black Lives Matter protests that we've seen throughout the summer of protests that took place here. You know, these protesters, which are literally, you know, they're storming the Capitol building, and it seems like they've been treated with, you know, kid gloves. And that's not to say, you know, I don't want to see any protester be abused or beaten up or anything of that nature. But again, this is just to highlight the difference in treatment between certain types of protesters. You know, there are photos going around of how some of the police are taking photos with these protesters, right? It's well known that, you know, there's been some issues with police departments that have been infiltrated by some of these right-wing groups. And so, you know, the FBI itself has said that, you know, this white nationalism and some of these groups are actually the biggest domestic threat in the country, and yet, you know, again, you have these groups being treated, you know, pretty much with kid gloves. So that's one issue that stands out. The other issue is far more complicated, and it's this. This is their reaction, basically, to the election results that have been driven to a large extent by Black voters, right? By Black and Latinx voters. We've heard this in like all of the attacks that Trump has made against these election results. He tried to target Michigan by targeting Detroit, Black voters. Even on a phone call where he was caught the other day threatening the Georgia Secretary of State, he was threatening, he was most upset about Fulton County, right? Black voters. These protesters are upset because they feel like they've been, an election's been stolen, because they are upset about the extent to which Black voters have been able to have their voices heard, and they're trying to overthrow and really disenfranchise Black voters. That's what this protest is about. It's really an extraordinary thing to watch.
Did you ever think you'd see something like this? I think all of that which you've described is obviously not surprising to you. But did you expect to see it manifest in the way it did today?
You know, I have to say I kind of did, right? I mean, because we've known about this protest for some time. Like this wasn't a secret protest. It wasn't stealth. It wasn't something that was just planned on social media and nobody knew about it, right? It was something that's been out in the open. Trump himself has called for it, right? So we've known that it's been taking place. We've known what some of their other protests have looked like. We know that just recently that one of the Proud Boys leaders has been expelled from D.C. or banned from D.C. because the last time they had one of these, you know, they tore down some banners at a Black church. And so, like, we've known that this was going to take place. We've known that it had the potential to turn into this type of protest. As I mentioned, the FBI knows that many of the groups that are involved in this movement are basically domestic terrorist type organizations. It's really astounding that there wasn't more of a presence, Capitol Police or DC Police or some type of presence before they got to the point of getting inside the building. I mean, the images are stunning. They're sitting inside the well of the chambers, like with their feet up on the desk. How it got to the point is really astounding. It almost makes you wonder if somewhere in the chain of command, somebody was given some kind of an order to basically say stand down or to evacuate the property in order to even allow something like this to happen. I mean, I don't want to get too conspiracy theorist, but I mean, it's really an odd situation that it was able to get to this point for such an event that, again, we've known about literally for weeks.
Yeah, it's striking, and I think you're right. Like, we don't have the answers to those questions, but it's hard not to watch what we watched this afternoon and not ask them, because the breach of Capitol Hill, the last time that happened was in the 1800s. And we as Canadians, I think, sat there watching today thinking, wow, how could they get in? it was definitely jaw-dropping. Like I said, though, we don't know the answers to those questions, but it's difficult not to answer them. Just before I let you go, Cliff, on the topic that we were discussing last night that feeds into all of this as well. While the president continued to make those claims about unsubstantiated claims about the election being stolen and your vote not counting, it apparently worked on some Republicans in Georgia who ended up staying home, as you speculated it might. And Democrats were able to come away with both runoff elections. How big of a deal is that?
Oh, I mean, it's obviously a huge deal. It means the balance of power in the U.S. Senate, which allows for Joe Biden and his administration to actually be able to get some things done on their policy agenda. It means so much in other ways, too, right? It means that in Georgia, there's really been a blueprint now for what it means or what the path is to be able to win a state like Georgia, to win other states in the South or other places, even in the Southwest, someplace like Arizona, that you can have a strategy where you can prioritize and reach out and invest in Black and brown communities and the organizations that serve and do outreach to those communities, that you can have that kind of a strategy and not only win an election, but reach historic levels of turnout in the process. Yes, Republican turnout was down, and that's an important thing. And yes, it turns out for Trump that when you tell people that an election is rigged and you tell them that maybe they shouldn't participate, surprise, surprise, some of your friends might actually listen to you. And that's what happened. But I don't want it to be lost that along with that, if it was just a decrease in Republican turnout, that wouldn't have been enough. It took a simultaneous increase in Black turnout. And we're seeing evidence that, Black turnout was somewhere along the lines of like 95%. In a runoff election. It was 95% of what it was in the general election. That's almost unheard of. And so this means a lot, both in terms of the policies that they'll be able to move forward, but also in terms of the blueprint that has now been established about what can be achieved when you invest in Black and brown voters.
Okay, Cliff, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you, as always, for making time for our program. Really appreciate it. Cliff Albright is the co-founder of Black Voters Matter. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.